Hello, everybody, and welcome to Wired for Winning. Today we have Kassandra Clemens from the United Kingdom, and Cassandra is a graduate from a university of Plymouth, I believe, and also has a diagnosis of ADHD. So today we're very excited to welcome Cassandra with us. I'll just do my clapperboard. Welcome, Cassandra, to the podcast. Delighted to have you. No, it's an absolute pleasure. It really is. I'm kind of delighted because last week you invited me to a session with, I think, 10 other people discussing the subject, and the insights I took from that were wonderful. Would you mind just starting off the podcast by telling us your story of ADHD, and we'll just take it from there, if that's okay.
Okay. Well, my ADHD developed, I think, around the age of 7, in terms of when it started to become obvious that something was quite different. I had been ill. Before that, life was difficult as well, but then I was really aware something was different, and I couldn't quite make it out. You know, my behavior changed. People around me seemed to be very far away, and I just felt very isolated. And as I became older, it was quite apparent that I took a lot of risks.
Okay.
I'm also autistic, and I think that combination was very difficult, you know, for me. I just couldn't quite see that it was a risk. I just did things that other people didn't do, and the gap between me and my peers became bigger and bigger and bigger, and I didn't quite understand what was going on. And that actually was going downwards in many ways, you know, until I was in my late 20s or 30s. I did many things that were considered very dangerous. And looking back, you know, I did that even as a fairly small child. I couldn't commit. I started getting actually a phobia of commitment, I think. There might have been an aspect of high sensitivity with feedback and so on as well. I didn't know any of these things. I was just considered very, very odd. Interestingly enough, my father is the same, and he has never considered that as a possibility. You know, for him, his way is the highway, and that's just that. But I think the two of us were playing off each other in a very uncomfortable way. So I've never really learned about that it might be attention differences. I don't like the word ADHD. I think there are lots of problems with it. So I call it attention differences because I think that comes very close to what it is, really.
I agree.
So I've only learned that when I was in my 50s. I had been working with students for 12, 13 years, you know, and many of them had attention differences. And, you know, it took me all these years before I woke up to the to the understanding I'm just like them. So all these people taught me something, because I was growing up with that my problems were personal problems. Very odd person, she just doesn't do things right. And my mum kept saying, well, she's just the way it is, she can't help it. So it took all these years, you know, and working with all these people and seeing transformations, and for me to actually wake up to the realization, this is my most conspicuous neurodivergence. I've got others as well, but this is the most conspicuous one. And it explains so much. I think that was when I started to change things, you know, basically.
So you talk about, and it's very interesting over the last number of episodes of the podcast, you know, the common theme, actually, and I don't know if this is just coincidence, but the common theme is late diagnosis. You know, when I was at school, I'm 54 now, and, you know, I was just a naughty boy at school. You know,
I was the naughty girl.
the naughty girl, absolutely. So you know, risk taker, did not just naughty things, but also dangerous things as well. And you mentioned autism and ADHD, attention difference, is what happened to draw you towards a diagnosis? Was it And in your words, was it just frustration at feeling disconnected from the world and your peers, as you say, or was there other factors involved in that as well? What was it for you?
Well, for me, it was to work with all these wonderful people. He came to me, many with in high anxieties around their work. I worked at the university, feeling that they were somehow detached from themselves, the world around them. Some of them were taking tremendous risks. There was this young girl who came in and said, "Oh, yesterday night I had an epileptic seizure after trying the drugs that people gave me. Next time I do it in a more safe surrounding." And it's just like, what? What are you talking about? How can you do that? You drink, you're sexually promiscuous, now you've got a seizure in a nightclub, and you think it's okay to have a seizure when you're not in a nightclub. So it was listening to people, working with them, helping them, because intuitively, I guess I was right on the ball. It just hadn't really occurred to me that I was the same. I reacted in every way with a tremendous understanding, and that's why people came back, and and that was the feedback I got. And I could help an awful lot of people in various ways. It was in my capacity and beyond. But it took all this time for me to I was never seeking a diagnosis. It basically just that understanding grew, that was the case, and it was waking up to it in a very short time frame, all of a sudden, realizing, goodness me, yes, that really explains it, because I'm also combined, and I used to think I was bipolar, and in fact, it seems to be a misdiagnosis very often, but I went to the psychiatrist years and years ago when I was in my 40s, and I said, I worry about this, and he said I was very close, but not quite there.
Brilliant.
But at the time, it's not long since we actually accept ADHD in adults, isn't it? I remember even now we have the I finished my work about a year and a half ago, but even then we still had some doctors, some GPs who would not accept a student coming with that idea of a diagnosis. But about 5 years ago, 10 years ago, definitely, it just didn't exist. So that psychiatrist, as nice as he was, it didn't occur to him that there might be something else going on,
That's very interesting. Can I ask, and again, this is for my edification as well as those listening to this, how can you describe how your combined autism and ADHD presents itself? What are the very key differences? And if you're able to communicate that, I'd be fascinated.
Well, I will try, because the autism diagnosis, I will say self-diagnosis, because I had by that time so much insight. Having seen hundreds of people, of various ages and backgrounds come to me with both, autism, but mostly what they called ADHD, and I helped them to get a diagnosis. At that point, I didn't need a diagnosis as such, but actually, I'm just about to get one, because I want access to work, and it's really my most conspicuous problem, the combination. So let me try to explain that. I think underlying everything always has been the autism. When I look back now, I can see I was that child. It was later in my life when it became more and more apparent, there was something else going on. I think in a way, I like it now. It's a great combination. I really do, because the knowing about the autism or the autistic traits has really allowed me to grow into my own skin. And I never could do that before, and I couldn't do it with the attention differences either. They explained a lot, they relaxed me, I could do more things, I didn't need to just live with it, but I could start managing it. But the autism is really what keeps me safe now. Before it was so difficult, with family, with friends not so much, but with family, the being around people, not understanding why I always felt I had to tread on eggshells. Everything wasn't quite right, everything was wrong. I didn't get the jokes, obviously. I mean, a lot of us don't.
That's true.
So people would, some of the family would actually always throw jokes at me and just wait for me not to get it. That was the joke,
Okay.
But I would come home completely drained, and it would feel like have to be so careful with everything. I couldn't say something without being careful. I couldn't do something without being careful. And even when I was careful, it was often wrong. That's what it felt like. So, and I think your environment they are putting you in a certain place, and it's nearly like they entrap you. You are becoming that person, and it doesn't matter what you do, you are that person. And now I don't feel like that anymore. If somebody gets on my nerves, I just tell them. If I don't want to do something, I just don't go. One of my family members was trying to trap me in there again. He had misbehaved, and I got angry. And I just said, well, in that case, I go. And then he accused me of having ruined his evening. And I said, well, if you are misbehaving and are reacting to that, don't make me responsible for how you feel about it. And I would have never been able to do that before, because it was clear that I probably was wrong, and I didn't know where I was going wrong.
Yes.
And interestingly enough, he accepted that. He wouldn't have accepted anything before, because it comes from me now. It doesn't come from my head. It comes from me as a person, as a whole person.
As a whole person, as somebody who's grown. Yeah, and I love the phrase that you used, grown into your own skin. And actually, that's an interesting similarity of my own journey now. I've used this expression before. I think it was Bob Dylan, the guitarist, said, the definition of success is waking up in the morning and doing exactly what you want to do for the day and going to bed at night having done exactly what you want to do for the day. And when you just mentioned there, if you don't want to do something, you just don't do it. And the triggers of certain social situations, whether it be family or friends, not entering into them is an extremely powerful tool, I believe, to be able to, not drain that battery, because it's... No, thank you for that insight. That, I kind of feel validated, actually, because of that personally now, and I hope others do as well. Tell me more around, the university lifestyle, the environment. Did you feel that was a controllable environment? I've got to be careful with what I say here. I work in myself. I'm in my day job. I'm a technology consultant. I have an interest in ADHD coaching as well, which I do. I run this podcast because I have ADHD. But I also like to have a very controlled environment, whether that be in the workplace or here at home in my own office. Is the world of working in that university environment a comfortable one? Or, I always imagine the worst case scenario for me is putting me in a suit and tie in an office in a corporate bank somewhere and starting to sweat and going, oh my God, my anxiety is up. I don't understand the social cues from people. What's happening here? And I'm interested in the environment that you create for yourself. Is that something you can explain as well?
Versus the environment that I used to be an employee in, or...
Yeah, I mean, past and present, and how did changing that environment, if you like, improve your sense of self?
I mean, I didn't need to wear corporate clothes, but we weren't allowed to show up in jeans, which is very interesting because I've got a sister-in-law in Switzerland, and she works in a university, and she will always wear jeans. She couldn't believe I wasn't allowed to do that, but we didn't have to, but we didn't have to wear corporate clothes. Now, for me, I think I think that my that my managers never really understood what we were doing, and that gave us for a very long time a lot of freedom. And in that freedom, I and my colleagues, we did thrive. Yeah, so we managed to do a lot of things for our students. We did a lot of things for staff as well. And I was so blessed with a wonderful, wonderful team. And we helped each other, and we kept each other safe. And that made a huge difference. Now that changed toward the end, and that's why I'm not there anymore. But what I realized through the pandemic, different to many other people, is that I really like to work from home. I really, really do. And I know some people are missing the corporate environment or their environment with their team. But I had an interesting experience when I came back with the team, when we met. It wasn't for me at all as if I had been away. You know, so we obviously had talked via Zoom and so on a lot. And I did not feel at all that I had been away, because I seem to really like working also on the computer. I don't mind that at all. I feel I can connect with people, and that's why I can do my work as well. I feel that connection is not interrupted because I don't see them. Obviously, there is a physical aspect as well, and it's lovely to hug someone, you know. But I didn't feel I was missing that so much.
That's very interesting.
Yeah.
I'm one of those people who has worked from home for over 20 years, and when necessary, jumped on an aeroplane somewhere in the world to go and meet people to do necessary work, you know. And like you know, whether or not it's pandemic related or not, I always felt that I can have a very good connection like I have with you right now. Even though you're sitting on a screen, I can feel your energy, your enthusiasm, you know that there's some connection. I often wonder whether the attention difference element of our brains allows us to have a deeper sense of rapport than others. I don't know if that's true or not, and I don't know if there's any researched evidence on that, but listening to people with these neurodiverse traits, that seems to be the case as far as I can see. It's nice to hear you say that, actually. Do you know, you talk about I like to work from home, but is there also an element of an occasional face-to-face engagement that you also need as well, or is that not important at all?
No, I do love it, and I hope to create courses which will have a residential part in it, and I know I will absolutely enjoy that. I really do. I do enjoy people. You know, I think our old idea of what autism actually is going straight out of the window, isn't it? There will be people who don't like people. You know, I've got a son who tells me he hates people, but still he works with a bunch of people, and he does that very, very well. So I'm not quite sure. I definitely don't hate people. I do love people, but I don't want to be overwhelmed by an environment full of people who are not interested in me, if that makes sense. Yeah.
It does completely, and I think that's the hell of that typical corporate environment that I mentioned, that I cannot imagine, you know. And again, I think that's because of being distracted by other people and needing to know what else is going on, rather than being able to then focus on, you know, what I need to focus on, and hence, you know, having a closed environment and being able to do that. Cassandra, medication, if I may, so historically, prior to diagnosis, did you self-medicate with alcohol or other things at all?
Food.
With food? Yes.
Yeah, for some reason, I just never liked alcohol. I never liked smoking, but food from a very, very early age on, you know, was a problem. And I thought it was because we were very poor, And, the fridge was always empty and, trying to get food in any way we could. But actually later on I realized it was an addiction and it was very important for me to have something. It took a long time, but it's gone. It's been gone now for quite a long time as well. Yeah.
Have you dopamine detoxed then? Was the need for food a medication for a dopamine hit, or was it for another reason? Again, I'm conscious of the autism element of this as well, and what that actually means,
Well, I do realize I've never thought about it really in that way, because medication for me has never been an issue. I was very ill. I told you that when I was quite young, and
yes.
My mother told me, and that's a typical autistic reaction. She told me that I should never take medication again because I had had too much already. So it never entered my mind all my life to take medication, unless perhaps the odd paracetamol, very odd paracetamol. So even with the discussion around, self-medicating and so on, it didn't really enter my mind that my food was a sort of medication as well. But I think at times I do eat to get energy. Yes, I do. But I think for me it was more to get the emotions down, to keep the emotions down. Just like somebody would drink in order not to have to think anymore.
Yes.
And the reason why in the end I did something about it, because it was because I realized if I would be a drinker instead of an overeater, I would probably have already killed myself. It was that bad.
Yes.
I would eat until I literally fall off the sofa. It was that bad.
Yes.
And there were some other addictions as well, which were really uncomfortable. So yes, I think for me it was more the trauma aspect of it, not to go into a kind of trance and forget about the world.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense actually. So that's historically. Now today, post-diagnosis, if I may ask, do you medicate with any particular methylphenidate or anything like that? You don't medicate at all? No.
And it's not because I'm a hero. It's because actually it just all my life I wouldn't take any medication.
Understood, yeah.
And I've seen in my siblings that they would take a lot of medication and it didn't seem to do them any good. Long-term health, mine is much better than theirs.
Yes.
I know people who tell me that they really benefited from the medication, and that's great. So I wouldn't ever say don't take medication. What I would say is if you can find safe ways to get off it, that is probably a really good thing, because medication will always numb you to some extent as well. Yeah,
I would tend to agree.
It's the nature of medication, because medication has got a kind of linear effect, and that will always numb part of our non-linear being, because nothing in our bodies and minds is linear. If that makes sense.
Absolutely, it does.
Yeah, but what I have done, because of the background, after I came back from that psychiatrist who told me that I wasn't bipolar, even so close. I mean, even then I didn't know anything about ADHD or about neurodivergence, nothing. I thought I needed to do something about this. Yeah, clearly the psychiatrist couldn't help. So it came to me intuitively that the problem was the high, not the low, even though the low was obviously the one where people might be suicidal, and I often was. But if I controlled the high, that was the thing to go for. So I've worked very hard on doing that. I do a lot of meditation, but I also wouldn't allow myself to go that high anymore. It was very uncomfortable, and since then I spoke to quite a few people and I said control that high, and they would say, but that is when I do all the great stuff, so I don't want to control that. But if you go too high, there is no way you will not go much lower as well.
That's fascinating. I'm gonna hold on to that part of the conversation for a few more minutes, if I may, and I'll just relate to myself. I do medicate. I take this, but actually I don't take it very often. And I take it, I was saying this to somebody yesterday as well, I take it on what I call stupid days. And the analogy for anybody who's listening out there who probably has heard this from me before is I define my attention difference as having, and I don't know when I wake up in the morning if I'm going to have a clever day or a stupid day. It's very digital. On clever days, the IQ, and I've never been measured, but let's keep the numbers simple for my benefit anyway, and it helps plump my feathers. But on a clever day, the IQ is about 150. Everything falls into place. Everything flows. The flow state is amazing. My physical ability, my mental capabilities are way up there, and I've produced my best work. Now, that may be coincidental as the high you describe, because it's a wonderful place to be. If I take Ritalin on those days, it brings me down. On the bad days, on the stupid days, my IQ is about 70. And I can't even read properly. I can't perform simple mathematics with a pen and paper. My writing is atrocious. My ability to construct sentences is atrocious. And on those days, I take Ritalin because it brings me up so that I can function. And the problem is, and I live with it now because we manage so well, I can't tell you if tomorrow is going to be a clever day or tomorrow is going to be a stupid day, and nor can I tell how long the clever days are going to last for in succession and how long the stupid days will last for in succession. So medication for me, and I'm fully aware of the latest long-term cardiac risks related to things like Ritalin and Concerta and other medications, and the long-term health deficits as a result of that. But you mentioned you mentioned meditation as well. Are there other areas of that? And also, I'm sorry to bounce around a bit, but controlling that high, my God, it's just making me think so hard about, I don't want to control that high because it's so amazing. Yeah. Tell me more. I'm fascinated by this.
Yeah. I mean, what you're saying makes complete sense. Yeah. And there was one time, because I have got a number of grandchildren, and when they were small, I really wanted to be there for them. And I was still in a place, not now when I feel I'm on a fairly even keel, but I was still having those difficult days, days where I just wasn't with it. And I remember thinking for the first time and the last time in my life, maybe I should have medication so that the kids are safe with me.
Yes.
So that I'm safe with the children. But I went through that, and I came out in a different place, So when I say control the high, control the silly parts of the high. It's not about controlling the flow. If you've got flow, that's great. But if you then stay up way beyond, when you can feel you're now doing something that isn't right, you've been working on your book already for 5 hours and you just push it to another hour with a cup of tea and things like that, that's not in the flow anymore, right? That is where you actually enter the dangerous high, which will get you down. Yeah,
I understand. Okay, so it's pushing that limit and knowing
the
when
limit,
to stop.
Exactly. Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
That's fascinating. So what are again, I'm going to relate to your story with my own as well, but what you said, you've worked for 5 hours on the book, don't do the extra hour. How do you identify that point in time when you say, now I'm overstepping my own limit? Are there physical cues? Are there mental cues that say enough's enough? How do you determine that?
Well, like everything else, you can't determine it when you are already in it. So you've got to prevent getting to that place, So what I've started to do is to figure out when I started to not be in my flow anymore. I read at the time a book called The 15-Minute something. I don't know. I will find it for you. It's I still have got it somewhere. basically what they were saying, work in 15-minute increments. So I tried things out because to start with, I might only have space for 5 minutes. And some of my students only had 2 minutes, but that was fine. So we tried various things. How long can I go feeling fresh and myself? And when do I start drifting off or get into a funny state? I don't want to get up anymore. I don't want to stand on my legs anymore. I'm just sitting there. Or when do I stop actually taking something in? Or the mind is starting to run off, away from me. So together with my students, we were doing all kinds of experiments with that. And I found that 15 minutes was definitely the cut-off point for me. So I would do something very simple, very, very, very basic. I would get up and give myself a stretch and just perhaps read a tiny little affirmation or say an affirmation or prayer or whatever it is, that people want to do. And what I found was how reluctant people are to get on their feet after sitting down. So I've started to do it with the individuals, with groups. Even nowadays, when I give a presentation, I try to get everybody up after 20 minutes because the body is actually starting to go into a kind of sleep state. I think because we are not made for sitting still, So I think after a certain amount of time, and people are a bit different with that, try it out, the body believes we are actually sleeping because we don't move.
Yes.
Yeah? And then all these funny things are happening. And one of the big ones here is that when we are leaning forward instead of being really upright, our lungs can't empty out the old stale air anymore.
Of course.
Yeah, so when you do that, the diaphragm goes down, the old air goes out, you get fresh air in, and everything is okay.
That's fascinating.
But also just because I did a course on mindfulness, and I don't know, with my attention differences, I can't do an hour of mindfulness, not even 20 minutes of mindfulness. So I do a few seconds of mindfulness. Standing on my feet immediately is a mindfulness exercise.
That's fascinating, actually. Yeah.
So I taught that to hundreds of people, I think, because it makes such a difference. A student should never keep sitting there. They should always get up every so often. Or I said in classes, if you can't get up because you're not at the back, then at least do that. Bring your shoulders back, wriggle your feet around, make sure that both feet are on the ground. And I think we can do that in corporate environments. We can do it at home. Nobody needs to know. And for me, I think it has become a lifeline. Yeah.
I think so too, actually. One of the, about 10 or so years ago over in the West Coast America, I attended a seminar by a gentleman called Tony Robbins. He's very well known. And actually, another gentleman was presenting on stage, and he was not really known then. He's very well known now, a Dutch gentleman by the name of Wim Hof, the guy who does the Iceman, the breathing exercises and stuff like that. And every morning, every lunchtime, and every evening, I do 40 deep inhales and exhale on the 40th breath and hold it. Now, I can get up to about 2 minutes of holding my breath now. Before you doing it, and 3 rounds of that, and I do that every day, and that's my breath work that I do, and I've been doing that for years. Actually, I very rarely miss that, but that has a pronounced effect on my cognitive behavior, and control over myself, and certainly my emotions as well, because I emotional control with attention differences is a tough one, and I'm certain probably with autism is probably catalyzed as well. I don't know that, but I'm assuming from the conversation we've had. So very interestingly then, so you yourself, you've kind of, that's a heck of a real journey to get to where you've gone. Pretty tough as a mother as well. Is there any areas of going through that? Because I often wonder, the differences between how neurodivergent elements present themselves in both men and women. A lady recently explained to me that, her attention difference presents itself as an internalization as opposed to an externalization. And again, I don't know, but I'm always interested in different people's opinions of how things present. I know for me personally, racing thoughts, constant internal dialogue going on, and the wish for silence sometimes is a very nice thing to have. And I often hear people talk about this thing called meditation, and sitting there as if they're on the side of a mountain as a guru, at one with the universe. I have never achieved that state of silence, and I suspect I never will. You talk about meditation as well. How does that work for you? And, how does your attention difference present internally as well as externally?
I started meditating when I was in my mid-20s. And part of that is also a relaxation, attention and relaxation exercise that actually takes care of the whole of the body. And I've done that mostly twice a day. And that I'm also very dyspraxic. And that has taken care of most of my dyspraxic elements. So that was very useful. And I remember my mother actually just having a fit of laughter when I told her that I've started meditating, because she said, you can't sit still for a second, And now I can sit still for hours and hours. I know what you mean with that internalization, because yes, I can sit still for a very long time. But my mind isn't still. So I haven't got the racing thoughts anymore. I haven't got the ruminations anymore, because you can overcome those. I told myself that I live in a rumination-free zone when I meditate, and after a while, my mind accepted that. Rumination is just simply not something I do anymore. I used to do it a lot. So that's really nice, so you're coming closer to that quietness.
Yes.
But my mind is, I try to explain it to somebody. I think about 2 seconds before the mind starts wandering off. I mean, it's a constant bringing it back, losing it, bringing it back, losing it. But that's all right, because the bringing it back eventually, that will get you to that mastery. It might take you many years. It's taken me 30 years so far, but it really makes a big difference, because you are exerting yourself as the master here. So that makes a big difference. But it still goes off a lot, especially when I'm anxious, when there is a lot going on, or when I have listened to audio books or something like that too much. It will play in my mind. I'm trying not to watch videos. They will play on my mind as well. So at the moment I've got a scroll and video fast, and that's been going on now for a while, and it's wonderful. The amount of silence that comes in your life is great. So from time to time, I reach that moment of silence, and it's wonderful. And of course you want to extend that if you can. But I would say not to worry about that. It's much more important, I think, to work toward that being the master of your mind, even if the mind still does its own thing, but that feeling of you can bring it back and you are the one who is calling the shots on it. That in itself, I think, is what gets us there.
I think so too, actually. It's, as we all go on our journey, and again, I don't know if it's after years of practice or just accepting the fact that as one gets older, one learns day by day anyway in the day-to-day world. I mean, Pink Floyd had a wonderful phrase that they used in one of their songs, back in the 70s, getting comfortably numb. And they were actually talking about self-medicating with various drugs so that numbness of silence existed then. And I think, it's very achievable with various practices such as meditation or breath work or whatever. I just have not personally got there yet, although I have a close friend who also has ADHD, that spent a weekend on an island in the west of Ireland here. And he said, George, I was there for 72 hours, and for 70 of those, I was sat cross-legged with my mind racing. And it wasn't until about the 70th hour did I actually achieve that state. And, he said it was very painful to go through that process, but I'm delighted I did, because I got there, and ever since then, in the last 10 years, I can achieve that state, which is extremely important to my sense of self and my sense of, as you say, mastery over my own mind, which is wonderful. Tell me, it's wonderful to talk to somebody who does the work that you do, as well as having the neurodivergent conditions that you do as well. And I'm kind of interested in your thoughts for the future as to, you mentioned much earlier in the podcast about setting up, in-person courses, that you would enjoy, and so on and so forth. What does that future look like for you, both personally and professionally? As far as supporting yourself in your own journey, but also your professional endeavors for helping others as well.
Well, some people call it late bloomers, isn't it? So I could now retire, but I'm just starting my business, and I know it will be, quite a big part of my life. But it will also allow me to have that balance between really being able to support and to be out there, but also have this time for myself. I wouldn't want to go back to being employed. I want to, my symbol or my logo is an Eastern dragon on which somebody rides, because I feel that in the Western mythology, the dragon is that beast that needs to be slain, and we have to fight so hard to overcome it, But in the Eastern philosophy, the dragon is the one who is right behind you, right with you, the bringer of prosperity and happiness and all the good things. And it came to me years ago that is what I want to do. I want to be able to ride that dragon, and be free. And it took a while, but this is what I'm doing. And this is what I teach other people to do, to have that mastery for them to feel really safe in their own selves, feel comfortable in their own skins, and start riding their, glorious, freedom-bringing dragon. So for me, the future, I think, is definitely a very positive one, because, having always, all my life, been so self-critical of myself and not being able, well, sometimes I was able to do what I wanted to do, but it was always really hard. And there would be a time when I just didn't have the energy for it anymore. And this is not what it feels like now. It feels like I get so much back for what I give. It's a self-sustaining energy, and in fact it's becoming bigger and bigger. I love to collaborate, which I wouldn't have done before, because I would have always felt I might be wrong, people find me out, this imposter syndrome thing.
Yes.
But now I think the thing to do is to collaborate as much as I possibly can. And I also do that with my clients, because everybody has so much to give, isn't it? So I want the future for all of us to have that for people to grow into their own skin, we need neurodivergent people. We need it so much. Look where normal, so-called normal, got us, to the brink of extinction. So we need that energy from everybody. And my argument always is everybody has got this particular something, very important something. And it might be a small thing. It might be that they can just give of their love. I met a young autistic person the other day from the US, and he lived in his heart, so I helped him to realize that's where his giving is. Yeah. So everybody has got something that is like pure gold, that needs giving to the world, because once we give it, I think we also get it back. We need to get that channel going. It doesn't matter. It doesn't need to be a big thing. We just need to work toward that, I feel, and then we feel good in ourselves.
I think so too. Actually, it's very interesting that when the pursuit of happiness, if you like, that US United States tenet that says the pursuit of happiness is health, wealth, the acquisition of wealth being money, and actually I think the reality is as long as we can satisfy our needs of a roof over our head, food on the table, the next most important thing for me, I think, and hopefully for others, whether they are neurodivergent or not, is actually identifying that thing that they like doing, that gives them satisfaction. I think I was talking about this yesterday with somebody, Ned Hallowell. He talks about it as being unwrapping the gift, the thing that lights your brain up, and go and do that, whatever that is. And I think that's fascinating. And the world is such a wonderful place now that there is the ability to do that. But Cassandra, this brings me to a particular point on the arc of the story that we talked before we started recording. I remember at the beginning of this particular episode, we're talking. You mentioned you are autistic and ADHD, if you like, as well, and you have an element of dyspraxia there. I remember seeing a photograph, a black and white photograph, of children handcuffed to cast iron radiators. This is recently. And when I looked at the caption underneath that, it said the date was the 1980s. Now, for those who are younger, they probably think, my God, that's ancient. But actually, the 80s was when I went to school. And they had, they were autistic. And it shocked me. It shocked me that I lived in a world where ADHD it didn't exist. There was just a naughty boy or a naughty girl, and kids with autism were handcuffed to radiators. Now, I'm not saying that in the UK that happened regularly, but that was one example. I suppose that builds a foundation to my question. You live in the United Kingdom now. How do you feel that the society of the United Kingdom acts towards or behaves towards neurodiversity? Clearly it's moved forward, but is it progressive now, in your opinion? Is it going backwards, in your opinion? How do you feel about society in the United Kingdom compared to, say, other countries as far as neurodiversity is concerned?
I think that is a multi-layer question and answer. Yeah, because what I observe is that the grassroots movement is becoming stronger and stronger. But the societal movement is going backwards. So, for example, where I used to work, we were right at the forefront of bringing, it wasn't even called neurodivergence at the time. Most people just talked about dyslexia, but we were in the forefront of it, well known for it. Now it's nearly erased down to nothing.
Yes.
And a friend of mine from Switzerland called it a rollback. So I think we came so close that it had to be taken really seriously. It wasn't anymore a question of, well, it's great to know about it, and perhaps we can do something, and it's all interesting, and it's exciting. It came to that point where people were starting to say, yes, but then you really need to abide by the law. Yeah, you need to abide by all the things that you're supposed to do by the law. And then that rollback happened because that paradigm wasn't shifting. And I think changing a paradigm is a question of grassroots movement at the end of the day. You know, it doesn't come from the top. The top has got completely different ideas about how life should look like, I think.
Yes.
And also, I believe that the paradigm, we created the word neurodivergent, and I think that helps the grassroots movement, but it hasn't changed how the paradigm is perceived officially. Yeah?
Okay.
Because now we are talking about neurodivergence instead of dyslexia or ADHD or whatever. But we're still talking about the same kind of ways that we measure it. We still see it as a disorder. You know, and we see all these words around us. We have to go through an assessment in order to be assessed and then labeled so that we can get any support. So all of this hasn't changed yet. But I think a lot of people now feel more comfortable because they use the word neurodivergent, and they can then say, oh, this is what it means, without actually abiding by it, because they still live in the same paradigm. So I don't think this will change until the grassroots becomes strong enough. And I do feel that is definitely happening. You know, the grassroots is changing the paradigm behind the scenes.
I tend to agree with you on that, actually. One of the things I've noticed in a couple of episodes with fellow neurodivergents who live in the United States is that in the United States, certainly ADHD is a formal disability.
Here too.
Yeah. Oh, is it in the United Kingdom?
Yeah.
Wow, I did not know that, actually. It certainly isn't here in Ireland at all. I don't know how I feel about that, because it's different, yes. Is it a disablement? I don't think it is. That's just my opinion for what it's worth. But I feel slightly disappointed. And like you, I don't like the word deficit. I do like the word difference. And I think that's what it is. And I'm very close to somebody who works on a subject matter which I think is very relevant to neurodivergence, called psychological safety in the workplace. And I feel that if you are a business owner who employs people, there's a layer of skills that various employees do that works towards the greater whole. But I think there's also a layer of capability. You know, if you give somebody with ADHD or autism or a combination of that a particular role to fulfill, they will do that much better than somebody who doesn't have those traits. And I think, you know, to identify that in the workplace is extremely important, and to provide an environment that will support that is also extremely important as well. So calling a disability, while that may help from a socioeconomic perspective with, you know, welfare and so on and so forth, I'm not certain that it's a good thing long term, as you say, from a, you know, the top down. And the analogy I always use is, you know, I'm convinced that Christopher Columbus had ADHD. You know, when he was on his ship going, I'm going to sail over the edge of the world and find out what's over there. And I'm convinced that now Elon Musk is doing something similar with, you know, putting humans on Mars. You know, the world needs people like Elon Musk to progress. You know. human beings to the next level. Whether going to Mars is the right thing or not, I don't know. But certainly, I can always imagine the quayside when Columbus left, and everybody, the crowds of people watching him leave, were saying, "Oh, you're going to sail over the edge of the world. That must be bad," and he did it anyway. So I think in life there's a lot of examples of where neurodivergence have definitely taken the world forward. And I'm also convinced that Silicon Valley and technology is taking forward with neurodivergence and autism and Asperger's and all of those great traits. So I wouldn't ever want to label them as a disability, I'm afraid. But again, it's probably just a play on words.
Well, I think it's more. Sorry, is it okay if I come in?
Yeah. Please, yes.
I think it's more than a play on words. It's very important that we as the grassroots people never ever use words that are not right, because language is so powerful. Language decides so much. And it's very important that we don't use the word disability. I think it might be even an interesting word for people who are physically disabled. Some of them don't like that word either because of the connotations. I think that we all can be disabled in certain ways, yes, but that's a different thing. That doesn't make us disabled. To my mind, the problem is that we don't know how to deal with difference. Yeah, so our education system is still exactly the same as it was for the Industrial Revolution.
Yes.
Yeah? And it has come about for that reason, to create a certain workforce for certain things. It's never been created to educate people to deal with life. Yeah. So, and because of that, it makes a big thing out of this idea of difference. So difference immediately becomes a problem rather than something that is normal and needs to be nurtured, because, as you said, it's the neurodivergent community that in a way is nearly responsible for this earth to evolve, for thought to evolve, for physical things to evolve. If you think that every seventh person is neurodivergent and many others have neurodivergent traits, that is a very, very high number, I think. And we need it at the moment, isn't it? We do need to have solutions for all kinds of things, from the heart to finding solutions like what are we going to do with this earth, mental solutions, all of these things. So I think at the moment it's particularly high, and that is why the grassroots can be so strong. Because you've got so many people. There is a little theory, I don't know where I got it from, that 15% of the population will always be neurodivergent, because otherwise we would stagnate. But now I think we are talking much, much, much higher, at the moment. So the problem that, as I see it, starts with this idea of difference not being good, because you put the spanner in the works of those people who want to make life simple for themselves, because it suits being in power and being, So we don't need to go more into that. I think we understand each other. But imagine if you would go to a school where these differences are completely normal, and you are taught according to what your brain does best. Would we have the same issues? Would we have a disorder? This whole idea of the brain of some people with ADHD being smaller, to me, it's completely laughable. That is such a waste of money for research. So much money is spent on medication, and partly, that's useful, but partly it's also hair-raising, because we actually don't know at all what we are doing. We don't know what will happen to a child who gets those medications, So if I would be a school mistress, I would take I would screen everybody, not just cognitively. I would just screen everybody, see what they are good at, what they really love, what they like doing, where they have got difficulties, where they don't want to engage. And then I would put all the so-called ADHD children into a class for gifted children possibly also the autistic children, because you can teach them everything they need to know, including their weaknesses, through what they are doing best and what they're really interested in. Problem gone.
Yeah, that's actually a very interesting mechanism of education, actually. Have you ever heard of a school in Suffolk called Summerhill? You may not have.
I probably have, but I might get that mixed up with a different school that's much older.
That's okay. I can afterwards, after this episode, and I'll put this in the commentary for others to look at as well. Summerhill is a very interesting, it's a private school in a place called Leiston in Suffolk in the UK, over on the east coast there. And how they function, it's a high school for 11 to 16-year-olds. And in year one, and it's called a different year now, but at the age of 11 when they first go into the school, the classes are derived and there are no rules. There is nothing. There are no classes. There are zero rules. And every year is exactly the same process. The kids will likely draw graffiti on the walls, smash furniture in the classroom, be completely misbehaved. And they then run out of energy to be destructive. And then the tutors sit with them, and they often sit on the ground in circles, and they then, in the same way that Lord of the Flies, the story, they then develop their own rules. Those rules that the kids themselves develop. They then, after having derived their own set of rules, then start deriving their own syllabus for learning. And then from that, they then choose the subject matter by which they choose to learn and when they choose to learn it. So what the school's philosophy is they've broken down everything to, let's go right back to the beginning. Let's go for nothing. You go and be destructive. You go, you form a group. You learn your own rules. And after that, what they find is that they, by having that syllabus that they have determined, actually it moves towards a syllabus of learning that's much faster than the standard process of teaching. And the quality of education that comes out of the end of it is much higher than the average method of learning. It's a phenomenal thing, but it's proved now, it's been around for 50 years, this particular school, and brings kids from all over the world. I like that as a mechanism. The cost of furniture with IKEA these days is probably a bit cheaper than it was, 50 years ago. But it's a phenomenal philosophy of learning. So I like that. But what it doesn't do is it doesn't separate neurodivergence within the group. It allows the group to coexist together as a unit that moves forward. And I really like the idea, again, if I take any organization that's complex in its nature, you will have people who are clever at math, those who are clever at English, those who have a better memory, those who can write, those who think faster, those who think slower. But as a unit working towards a greater goal, I think that's a wonderful thing as well. So, Cassandra, can I just go off at a tangent, if I may, as well? Typically in an ADHD fashion. You talk about the future, the business that you're setting up, and are you, and it seems an oxymoron to ask this question as we're both putting ourselves out there in a podcast to the world, but has your attitude towards your neurodivergence and how you are publicly about it? I tell everybody I've got ADHD. Right? 10 years ago, I didn't. Are you open about it to your social circle, to a wider audience now, or not? I'm just intrigued by that.
Again, it's an interesting question because I'm completely open when it comes to the people I work with or, reach out to in my work, because that's so important. How can you work with neurodivergent people and actually holding something back? So that would be silly, really. in my social circle, I don't make much of it because, especially in my family, there's still a lot of ideas of how things should work and don't work. So I don't mention it much. But when I have mentioned it here and there, it actually has improved things a little bit, And now, at least 2 of the grandchildren are on what some call the spectrum, which is an interesting thing because, of course, that in itself creates an us and them.
Yes.
And that's quite interesting how that is handled. And again, I think we are not quite there yet to be open about it all. I think it's still like, I'm not quite sure whether I'm a bit afraid of that or whether I think that should be an interesting thing, whether I should have any part in that because I would need to think about myself, So yeah, that is, when people talk about unmasking, quite honestly, I don't quite know what that means. I think to some extent I probably have unmasked because I would have never done anything like that a while back. And now, when I do a video, I'm just myself. And I also have found that the way that my face works and my body works is very different. I sometimes take a photo and I look at it and I think I would never have looked like that ever before now. Yeah. So I think there is this element of unmasking, of just being me. But in terms of talking about it, I would immediately, if it feels right, I wouldn't hold anything back then, or would, I very often, I'm responsive, let's put it that way. But I don't usually start the conversation. I think it's not possible to bring people onto the side of how I think by telling them about it unless there is a reason for them that they want to listen. Because that paradigm is still too strong.
Yes, yeah?
Yeah?
I completely empathize and share the same thoughts, actually. If it's appropriate, I will share. I don't stand on a soapbox and go, hey, everybody, I have ADHD. I don't do that. But where it's appropriate. Listen, I'm going to ask you a final question, if I may, because we've come really well through the arc, and thank you, for the last hour of your time sharing. It's an odd question, but I do this for my own edification. If you could have your time again from the beginning, and I could click my fingers and say, I will take away your autism, your ADHD, your dyspraxia, and allow you to be neurotypical and have your time again, would you choose that path?
I don't think something like neurotypical actually exists.
No.
They're just all different. But there is definitely an element of being different.
Yes.
So not everybody has got that difference that gives that particular spark. That doesn't mean that there are less, but there is definitely an element there. But I don't think neurotypical exists. So from that point of view, it's not possible for me to answer that question because I am who I am. And if I can be who I am without all the grief that has come through the disabling aspects, if I could have lived a life where people would have taken me as I am and taught me how I needed to be taught and not give me the feeling that I'm less and different in a negative way. Yes, of course, that would be great because I could have done so much with my life from the beginning.
Yes.
But at the end of the day, I am who I am, and obviously I went through all of this. And so I'm grateful that I've still come out the other end, now being me and not somebody else's creation. Yeah.
Yes.
I don't know whether that answers your question.
No, it does. It absolutely does. No, thank you very much. Kassandra Clemens, thank you for joining me on the podcast today. I've really enjoyed that. I'm just going to press stop on the record, but if you just hold on for a second as well, if that's okay. I'm delighted. I really am. Thank you. Let me just pause.